Okay guys, so now we're dealing with rational expressions. And what we're going to be doing with this is you're going to have a problem that looks similar to the one I've got right here, where we have 12c squared over 3c plus 6. And what we're going to try and do basically is simplify this as far as we possibly can. And we do that a number of ways. We'll divide some things, we're going to factor some things, and we're just going to simplify it in any way we possibly can. So let's take a look here and see what we can do. The first thing I want to do is I want to take notice to the top part of this and the bottom part. We call this the numerator, we call this the denominator. And what we want to start is kind of looking at this as two separate problems, the numerator and the denominator. Let's look at the numerator first. And taking a look at this, is there anything that we can factor out of the numerator and just the numerator? So we look at this and it's only got one term, 12c squared. That's all one term. And you can't factor anything out of just one term. You have to have at least two terms to factor something out. So the answer is no, you can't factor out anything out of that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and write this over here. Since I didn't do anything, make any changes, factor anything out, I'm just going to leave it alone and write it exactly how it is. Okay? So we're done with the numerator. Now we're going to look at the denominator. And I've got two terms because they're separated by a plus sign. You can see that right here. And so, yeah, I can probably try and factor something out of this. So let's take a look and see. What is my greatest common factor between 3 and 6? And the answer on that is 3. So we can factor out a 3. And then anytime you factor out a number, you bring it to the outside, and then you draw a set of parentheses. This is just a review, a real quick review on factoring. We've already done that packet. Now what you want to do is you want to take that number that you just factored out and divide each term in the denominator by that greatest common factor. So what is 3c divided by 3? Well, if you see here, we learned when we're dividing numbers way back in 3rd, 4th grade that if you have the same number on top and the bottom, you can cancel them out. So we're going to cancel through those. And that's going to leave me with a c left over right there in that first position. Bring the plus sign over. And now we have this next number is 6 divided by 3, which is 2. So we have successfully factored the denominator in this problem. We are not done yet, though. We now still have to try and simplify this as far as possible. So we factored. Now, what I would like to do before we continue on with simplifying this is let's go ahead at this point, once we've done all of the factoring, so step 1, factor. Okay, we're going to factor very first thing. Once you are done with factoring, you're going to find your what's called your excluded, I'm just going to abbreviate it, excluded values. Okay, so you're looking for the excluded value. What that means is you can see this variable right here, this letter C, in the denominator of our fraction. And we can put any number we want to into that variable except for maybe 1 or 2 numbers. And what we need to do is find what those 1 or 2 numbers are. And here's how you figure this out. In this case, what you'll do is you'll set the entire denominator equal to 0. So I'm going to do that down here. I'm going to use a different color for this so you can see it a little bit better. So we've got 3 times c plus 2 and set it equal to 0. Now, the reason I'm going to set it equal to 0 is because you cannot have 0 in the denominator of a fraction. So if I had the number 5 divided by 0, that's not going to give me a number if I put that into a calculator. It's going to give me undefined. Or an error. It might give you an error. Either one of those. It's not going to work is the bottom line. So if you have a 0 in the denominator, that number will not work. So that's what we're trying to do. That's why we call it an excluded value. We're trying to find a number that if c were that number, it would make this whole bottom part, the denominator, 0, in which case would make this entire problem undefined. So we've got to find what that excluded value is. And to do that, we come back down here and set it all equal to 0. So we will divide by 3 to get rid of this 3. So the 3's will cancel. 0 divided by 3 is 0. So that leaves me with c plus 2 equals 0. So then we subtract 2 on both sides. That cancels out. So that leaves me with c equals negative 2. So this means that if we were to plug negative 2 in for this c right here, we would get negative 2, right? So negative 2 plus 2 is 0. Well, then you have 3 times this set of parentheses, and so we have 3 times 0, which is 0. And again, if you have 0 in the denominator, it will not work. So with that being said, and this is how we actually write it, this will be your answer here, or part of your answer. You would write it as c cannot equal negative 2, and that's how you would write that. So that's going to be your excluded value. Number 3, the next step is to continue simplifying. So number 3, simplify. Okay, so we're going to simplify this as far as we possibly can, and on this one there's only one more step. If you look here, we have a 12 and a 3. And notice how the numerator here is not separated by a plus sign. If it was separated by a plus sign, we couldn't really do much with it, but it's not. Like down here in the bottom, we have c plus 2. Those kind of go together. It's in parentheses. It has to go together. You can't pull that c out of that to do anything with. So if it's separated by a plus or a minus, it kind of has to go together. But see up here, there is no plus or minus sign. You're just multiplying this 12 times the c squared. So you're able to do a little bit of stuff with that. So let's take a look here. We've got 12 divided by 3. And what is 12 divided by 3 going to leave me with? So we'll cancel that out. 12 divided by 3 is 4. So our final answer then, that's as far as we can go with this, is going to end up being 4c squared over c plus 2. And so this and my excluded value are going to be my final answer. Now here's another problem that we have here. This is problem number 2 in your packet on page 1. Now if we take a look here, let's see where we're going to start. Remember, on the last problem we started with the numerator, so let's do that here. This time the numerator has 2 terms, the 4m and the negative 2. So we can work with this. We can try and factor something out. So let's take a look and see what we can factor out of this. So my greatest common factor between both of these terms, they both at least have a 2 in them. So let's factor out a 2. And then remember, I draw out my sets of parentheses here. And then once you are done factoring out everything you can factor out, you're going to divide by that greatest common factor. And just on the numerator, because that's all we're working with right now. Remember, we kind of treat them at the very beginning of the problem like they're 2 separate problems. So 4 divided by 2 leaves me with 2. And then don't forget that m is there, so I'm going to write that over here. 2m. And then negative 2 divided by 2. And remember, like the last problem, when you have the same number on the top and the bottom, that cancels out and leaves you with a 1. So I'm going to subtract 1 right there because we just bring the minus sign over. That's all going to be over. And then look at 2m minus 1. All you can factor out of that is a 1, and that won't change anything, so we're not going to do anything with this. So we just simply leave it exactly how it is. 2m minus 1. Now, let's take a look and see what we can do here. If you notice right here on the top and the bottom, kind of like what we were doing with the 2 over the 2 here, where we canceled those out and that left me with a 1, you see we have 2 expressions. We have 2m minus 1 over 2m minus 1. And in the last problem, we weren't able to just pull out part of that. We would have to pull out the entire thing in order for it to work. So right here we can do that because we have the exact same thing, 2m minus 1 on the top and 2m minus 1 on the bottom. So we can cancel those out. And you'll notice as you go through this packet and through these rational expressions, you're going to start seeing lots of things that cancel out right towards the end of this. So you want to factor everything as far as you can, and then cancel whatever you can out. Whatever you're left with is going to be your answer. So what are we left with here? 2 is my answer. So all of this right here boils down to a 2. Now one step we forgot, because remember step 1 was to factor as much as we could, and then we went ahead and did step 3, which was simplify, but we forgot to do step 2. Step 2 was to find my excluded values. So let's look back at our original problem here. We have 2m minus 1, and then once we factored everything out, we still have 2m minus 1 on the bottom. So at that point, that's when we should have set that bottom part equal to 0. So let's take a look here. We had 2m minus 1, and we set that equal to 0. And what you're going to do here is you're going to just basically try and get m by itself. So we'll add 1 to both sides. That's going to cancel out, leaving me with 2m, and then equals 1, because 0 plus 1 is 1. Now we divide by 2 on both sides. That's going to cancel out, leaving me with m equals positive 1/2. And so this is going to be my excluded value, and then this is going to be my actual answer. So both of these will be part of your answer here. Now, one thing I want to show you with this one that's actually kind of a neat trick. If you have a problem like this where you have 2m minus 1 equals 0 when you're looking for the excluded values, there's a little shortcut I'm going to show you what to do. So let's write this out again over here just so we don't have slashes through it or anything like that. So we have 2m minus 1 equals 0. And we're trying to find our excluded value. Here is a very quick way, and you'll do enough of these that you'll want to start using this little shortcut. Here's a very quick little shortcut to getting the answer to this rather than going through and solving all this, okay? All you have to do, look at this sign right here. It's a minus sign. So your answer is going to be a positive. Take this number, whatever this number is right here, put it right next to the positive sign, and it's going to be over whatever the number is out front, 2. So we do the opposite of whatever the sign is, take this number, write it down, and put it over whatever the front number is. So if we had, let's say we had 3m plus 2 equals 0. We do the opposite of this sign, so it's going to be a negative. Take this number, write it down next to the negative over the front number, which is 3. So if we had 10m minus 11 equals 0, my answer is simply going to be positive 11 over 10, because you get used to it real quick there, just writing those numbers down just like that. Our next problem is number 8 in your packet on page 1. And so we have 4x squared divided by 2x squared minus 6x. And this one's got a little bit different solution when it comes to our excluded values, so that's why I wanted to do this one. This one actually has 2 different excluded values. All the ones we've worked with so far have only had 1. So let's take a look here and see what we've got. First, we look at our numerator. There's nothing we can factor out because it is simply one term. So I'm simply going to write down my numerator just how it is. Didn't change it, so write it down. Now we look at the denominator. Is there anything we can factor out of these 2 terms? And yes, there is. We can factor out a 2, but if you notice in the variables, they also have at least an x in both of them. See, this one has x squared, and this one has x to the first power, or just x. Doesn't really matter how you write that. I'm just going to write it as x. Either one of those will be fine. But they at least have an x in both of them, so we can also factor out an x. Okay? So now what we have to do is we have to come back over here and divide each term by the greatest common factor that we just pulled out. So we're going to divide by 2x on both of those. And what is that going to leave me with? Well, again, we have 2 divided by 2 cancels out. X squared divided by x to the first power. Remember, with laws of or rules of exponents, if they have the same base, you can subtract the exponents when you're dividing them. So x squared divided by x to the first is the same thing as saying x2 minus x1, which is just going to be x1 or just x. They're the same thing. So it's just going to leave me with an x. Now, minus, so we're going to go ahead and bring that over. 6 divided by 2 is 3. And then x divided by x cancels out. So we're just going to leave it like that right there. Now we finished factoring out this denominator completely. So what we want to do now is we want to take a look and see what our excluded values are. Now in the last ones we only had one variable in the denominator, but in this one you can see we've got 2 variables here. And that simply means you're going to have 2 excluded values. It makes it actually kind of easy. So here's what you do. You're first going to take just a set of parentheses and the numbers inside them and the expression inside them, and set that part equal to 0. So x minus 3 equals 0. And when you do that, it's going to give you an excluded value. Makes it real easy. Just add 3 to both sides. You get x equals 3. Let me do a better 3 than that. There we go, it's a little better. So x equals 3. That's going to be one of our excluded values. The other one, we'll take the numbers outside of the parentheses and set that equal to 0. So do 2x equals 0. Now divide by 2 on both sides, and you're going to cancel out those 2's. That's going to leave you with x cannot be 0. So anytime you see where you have two variables in the denominator at this point in the problem, you simply set both parts of that equal to 0. X minus 3 would be equal to 0, and then 2x is going to be equal to 0, and that will give you your two excluded values. So x cannot be 3, x cannot be 0. So that's going to be part of our answer, so I'm going to go ahead and circle that. The last thing we have to do, step 3, is simplify this as far as we can. And so you look at the numbers in the numerator and then the numbers outside the parentheses, in this case in the denominator. So 4 divided by 2 is going to leave you with 2. X squared divided by x is going to leave you with just an x in the top. So our final answer is going to be 2x divided by x minus 3.